All right, so this is part 2 of the seam repair video. As you can see, we have our F86 wing that I repainted the edge in flat red so you could actually see it on the camera. So as you look at the edge of the wing, you see the red color sticking out. That is what we're going to be using to make sure that we don't have any gaps left in the surface. Okay, so I also have this wonderful file here. This has 7 different grits to it that help you file things and sand them and make them smooth, because once you paint this, the paint is going to pull out any flaws that you might see in the plastic. So I've already finished one side, so I've finished the right wing. As you can see, the edge is very smooth. There's no red paint remaining. It looks very good. Now, there is a little bit of red paint remaining right here on the pitot tube, just because we can't get the file in there that tight to get it out without possibly damaging the pitot tube. So what we'll do to get that paint off, because we don't want it to show through the final coat, is take just a Q-tip and dip it in paint thinner, and then we'll rub that paint off. But for now, we want to fix the seam on the left wing. All you're going to do for that is select a good grit of sandpaper or file if you have one, and then you're going to begin to sand the edge in light motions. Don't ever press hard on what you're sanding, because you don't want to dig too deep and you want to try to avoid sanding off detail. Now this kit right here has raised panel lines, which means they're very easy to sand off. And we can do a couple of things to repair those panel lines once they're sanded off, such as engraving them. But to do that, then we have to go through and engrave all the panel lines on the entire kit. And that is a very long, drawn-out process that I try to avoid. So typically, the best kits have recessed panel lines, which means they're actually dug into the plastic, and they look more realistic that way. And they're a little bit easier to repair if you accidentally file one off. But in this case, as we're kind of just building this out of the box for the most part, so you're just going to sand across the seam, but you want to make sure that you don't flatten it out. So you're going to come at it from all the different angles and make sure that you maintain the round shape of the leading edge of the wing. So you're just going to go across the seam back and forth using that initial grit of sandpaper. And what you're looking for is, if the seam has a gap to it or an overhang, you will see the red paint stick under the lip where the sandpaper, the flat sanding surface of the file, is not pulling it off. So you're just going to continue to work your way down the leading edge of the wing, coming at it from all the different angles and working on it. And when you see the red paint stick, I don't know if you can see it real well on the camera here, but there's a bit of red paint right along the edge of the seam right here, that there's a little bit of lip where the upper half of the wing hangs over a little bit, and that's what we're trying to prevent from staying on the kit. Because once we apply the final coat of paint, those overhangs and those seams will look really tacky, and they'll stand out a lot in comparison to the smooth surface of the rest of the kit. So we'll try to sand those off. And we'll just work the edge of the wing nice and slow using light pressure. Varying your sanding maneuvers. You can do circles, you can go straight across it, but the big thing is just making sure that you don't flatten out the leading edge. That also will stand out a lot once the final coat of paints or coats of paint are put on it. You want to take your time doing this. You don't want to go too fast, because that will also cause damage to it that you will then have to go back and fix with modeling putty and things like that. So my thought on it is work slow, nice and smooth, and get a nice harmonious outcome. And also, like the points where the tree or the sprue connected to the parts before we cut them off, every once in a while, if you don't cut those quite right, you'll get little furrows dug in there, and you might have to go back and fix those with hobby putty. There's some really great putties out there. Testers makes a good one, so does Tamiya. All of them are really nice. You can also use gap filling super glue, though I typically don't use gap filling super glue just because I'm not honestly very experienced with it, and until I get some practice models and stuff that I'm not too picky about, so I can test it out and I'm not worried if I make a mistake, I'm not going to start using that on the videos just yet. So you can see this section of the wing right here before the wing fence is now pretty nice, and we don't see any gaps left in there. All the paint's come off nice. So now we're going to switch to a finer course of paper, and we're going to clean up the edge real well. Sandpaper will dig micro trenches, if you will, or put scratches in the surface of the plastic that you can't necessarily see with the naked eye depending on the color of the plastic. But once you apply that final coat of paint, especially if you're airbrushing, because the paint with an airbrush comes on so thin, it will really bring out any flaws. So you're going to switch to a thinner grit of sandpaper, or a finer grit rather, and you're just going to go back over the entire surface, and you're basically, what you're doing at this point is removing those micro scratches from the first grit. Once you're fairly confident that that grit has removed all the micro scratches from the previous, then you'll switch to a finer grit even still. So this side is the next grade down. You can probably hear the difference in what it's doing. It's not abrading so much, it's almost more polishing the plastic. This is a really great file just because it has all of the different grits built into one. So it makes it real fast. You don't have to fumble around with a bunch of different sanding sticks and files and things. Makes it real nice. So you're just going to, once again, cover all the edge, and you're removing those micro abrasions. Once you're confident that you've removed all those, you go to the next finer grit. I like these ones with the rounded tips because you can really get on the edges and get into the crevices and stuff without beating up things too much or worrying about removing too much detail. You can really get pretty precise with where you're putting this. Then we'll go ahead and switch to another finer grit. And then we'll go to the next grit. And this is actually made for women's fingernails, so it kind of has like different words written on it. So like the first couple, they say, you know, coarse grit to shape, and then even out, smooth, neaten edges, buff, and then shine. And that actually works really well with polystyrene that these kits are made out of. It actually works really nicely to buff things, and you can even use like these really fine grits, like the buffing side and the shining side. You can even use those on clear parts if you need to, without worrying about fogging it up too much. And if you do get little micro abrasions and it kind of looks like it's got a fog to it, Future Floor Shine will fix that up real nice for you. All right. So that's pretty good. It's very, very smooth to the touch. You don't see any issues with it. It looks really clean. So that is a nice finished seam that it looks like the plastic is one piece, that it's just molded together. You don't see any gap or seam where we put it together. And that's really what you're going for, because when you put that final coat of paint on there and you shoot it with the airbrush, you're not going to see any plastic overhang or any gap or anything like that. And that really adds to the realism of the aircraft. So we will use the same method to do the rest of the wing edge, and we can use the same method on the fuselage as well. I painted the entire seam where the fuselage have joined all the way around the aircraft, and even where the landing gear well went in, you can kind of see a little bit of the hobby putty and the red paint still remaining there. There's some more work to do on that. And around where the nose connects to the fuselage, the same thing. That method works really well. Generally, I don't use red paint. I usually use flat gray or a silver, just because there's not as much pigment in there. They don't gum up the files as much. They dry quicker. But for the purposes of you being able to see it on the camera, I've used the flat red, and it actually shows up quite nice. So you can see all the different seams and gaps and things. And so that method works very well no matter what part of the kit that you're working on. and just allows you to get a nice fine finish on that. So once again, please check us out on Facebook and YouTube and Google+. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. Thank you.